Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Mindset Matters. I'm joined by former RTE media pundit, award-winning author and mental health advocate Brent Pope. In this episode, Brent talks openly about his own mental health and the tools he uses to keep his mental well-being on track. Now, thank you, Brent, for joining me on Mindset Matters. I'm going to start first off by asking you to tell me about you and your story. So for some listeners who might not be aware of your story.
Yeah. Well, we probably don't have enough time to tell my whole story, but basically, I suppose, I was known as an elite sports person, and that from New Zealand, born in New Zealand, Huckleberry Finn sort of lifestyle when I was a kid, I come from a farming background, so plenty of fresh air and good living and, no stresses until I got into my kind of mid-teens. And then I just realized myself that I was a bit different. A couple of years ago, Ciara, I found a book that I'd hidden in the attic. And I looked at what was inscribed in the back, and I won't tell you what was inscribed because it's personal, but I looked back at the date when I bought that book, and I was 14 years of age, and the book was called When Will I Ever Be Happy? And that kind of made me sad because I thought that's the way I felt about myself at that stage. And so I went through the kind of the early days of kind of panic attack, or what I call catastrophe anxiety rather than panic attack. Sometimes it manifested in panic attacks with being unable to breathe and think you were having a heart attack. But I didn't know anything about heart attacks at that age. I just knew that it was a very uncomfortable feeling. What I had my own nickname for it was kind of a Gatling gun of negativity. That's the way that I saw it. One of those, imagine people going back those old machine guns that they used to roll out, spit out the bullets. And what did that look like for me? It was just all this negative stuff coming into my life, what I should be worried about, that I'd be a failure, that I wouldn't be cared for or loved, that I would never have a family, all those sorts of things. And it was very disturbing because I just felt that I was abnormal. I felt that I was different somehow from other people. And in those days, you didn't talk to anybody. You couldn't talk to anybody. So all through my teenage years, I probably masked it to a certain degree. I masked my life as being the sort of class joke or the team clown, the person that when he was given disappointments in sport or in life, he got through them, he marched on, he pushed through all those things. But at the end of the day, when I talk to men especially, we're guilty of pushing all these problems under the carpet and hoping that they don't come back to affect us. Well, mine come back tenfold in my mid-20s when I had effectively had a mental breakdown, just the stresses of disappointments, the stresses of thinking I was a failure, the stresses of playing high-end sport and being judged. All those stresses come home to bear, and I had I don't even like to use the word mental breakdown. I'd rather call it an emotional breakdown. I just, yes, and I started to have dark thoughts, and that sent me down a terrifying spiral in my life, where I effectively didn't think I had much to look forward to in my life, and that set me down. Actually, that set me to have a conversation at the darkest period of my life. I won't go into that too much because it might be triggering for people, but in the darkest point of my life, calling up my father saying I can't go on, and coming to pick me up from a rugby match, I just kind of walked off the pitch and just said, look, I can't carry on living like this. And then I kind of locked myself away from friends. I always felt those years, I always felt I was a burden to people. I always felt that they wouldn't understand, or even if I went to them, there was no hope. I was told the same things that a lot of men of people are told in that position, push through, Brent, real men don't cry, real men aren't vulnerable. I felt it was weak to speak. Certainly weak to speak to other rugby players because we were always seen as being the same as me, big, strong, aggressive men that were manly men, and it took me years to decide that it's okay to be vulnerable. That's part of being a man too. But But then kind of I had a conversation that effectively changed or saved my life. And it was a Samaritan suicide hotline. I rang in the middle of the night, not expecting to get an answer because I didn't think at that stage anybody would understand, what I was going through. Um, and the guy on the other end of the phone was what propelled me to do what I do now, really. And he just said, look, it'll be okay, friend. And in that one sentence, he gave me hope that maybe I could recover from this. And also the fact that he called me a friend when he didn't know me. And that was what friendship was about for me. It was about, listening to someone, telling me he could get me professional help the next Monday or whatever. And that changed my life. It's not to say that my life has been rosy since that, very, very much not so, but it did give me more understanding in what I'm going through. And then I went back subsequently and I studied to be qualified to be a psychotherapist, so to get the science behind my journey as well. But for the last 20 years, really, I've been out there in Irish society saying, okay, less judgment, more understanding and more awareness around mental health. At the end of the day, I look at it as an illness that has to be managed. And I would say I'm in when I talk to people in the construction industry, even down with the guards conference last week, and I just say, look, it's all about, rather than saying why me when something like that happens, it's really about saying why not me. I was nobody special, and if it can happen to me, if I can go through this, it can happen to somebody else. And men in particular get stuck. We get stuck in a wheel that we don't think there's any chance of recovery. And that's what, shockingly, of the nearly whatever stats you listen to or taken, but say we're saying 450 to 500 people take their own lives in Ireland next year, about the same as in New Zealand, actually. We're looking at over 100 of them, over 80% of them being men. So what I say to men is, what are we doing wrong? What are we doing different from women? Even though women suffer from mental health disorders in far greater numbers than men, actually, statistically, but they just deal with it better. There's something in their spirit and their nurturing DNA that men see talking to other men as being a threat, or talking to friends as being a threat. That, it's like the lion coming into the pride and they fight to save the pride. That's in our DNA. But what I'm saying to men is we need to change. We need to be prepared to say, look, I'm struggling with this, and not feel weak to speak. So that's basically a quick synopsis. Well, a long synopsis, but took me
Do
a
you
book to
think,
write
yeah,
about that a few years ago. So
do you think, Brent, is society's attitude starting to change around men and mental health? Or do we have a long way to go? What's your view on that?
I think, that's a really good question, Ciara, because it's a question I get asked all the time. And I've probably been foremost in Ireland, and it's not an egotistical thing, but I've been speaking out about my journey for the trying to save other lives for going on 20 years. It's a long time to be dealing with this and telling your story and going through the judgment and
Yeah.
that. And I hear it all the time, but things are changing that. Now, my answer to that, Ciara, is yes, people are talking about mental health more because it's kind of on the radar. But the question for me is, who are they talking to and what are they talking about? I think they're the questions that need to be asked, because we've got new generational problems, as you know, in mental health. Social media wasn't around, thank God, when I was growing up. These things like social media, bullying, validation, expectation of people's lives. I've just talked to some young people there because I always try to get research about early intervention into schools, and that's my next elephant in the room project. But what I'm hearing is all this, how other people dictate how they see their lives as being success. I'm going back to them saying, look, success is in building connections and mental fortitude. That is what success is. But you talk to a young person now, what is success to them? It's usually fame and money. That's the two things they start off with. And I get it. We're all like that at some stage. But what I'm saying is, when it comes from people of my generation, I don't understand. I try to, because I counsel a few people and they go, I can't understand the hurt and the pain that goes with some young person sitting around there now being bullied on social media, being ostracized from friends, and thinking about taking their own life. I mean, that's horrific to me. So what I'm saying, go back to your original question, is yes, there's more awareness out there. But there's also still a lot of judgment out there in different ways, especially the expectation, validation of living the perfect life on Facebook. Somebody can have, as I said to them last week, you can have 5,000 friends on Facebook, but not one real friend you can go to. That's changed. And also in the whole community spirit has been sort of eradicated every year. It's not the same island I came over to. It's not. The communities aren't as strong as they were before. People are radiating to the big cities or whatever. We're losing that community spirit of hopping over the fence and looking after an elderly neighbour or doing their lawn because people think, oh, well, I don't want to be nosy here or something like that. So we went some way back to that with COVID, funny enough. That was a good thing about COVID. Mm-hmm. People cared for each other a bit more. And then once the world opened up again, there we were back to our old lives of not talking to people, not saying hello, not knocking on the elderly neighbour's door and saying, can I go and get the groceries for you, or do you want to chat? So we've lost something, we've lost something.
Yeah. I just want to go back because I thought that was really interesting about success. Tell me what's your definition of success, Brent?
I understand. I don't want to be hypocritical and say to everybody, slap every young person's hand and say, okay, you shouldn't at 20 years age deem success to be the Ferrari or playing for the All Blacks or Ireland or something. Absolutely. And go after your dreams. I'm not about that. I'm just saying I'm trying to compartmentalize it and say to people, don't lose the things that are most important. Don't lose those along the way because you have your goal set and one's okay, work hard and everything like that. But work-life balance is very much about doing the things that make you happy too. Sort of don't always look for things. I suppose what I'm trying to say is my advice is don't always look for things with an extrinsic value. Look for the feel-good factor within you. In fact, the longest psychological study, I'm always fascinated by these studies they do over the longest psychological well-being study was something that was done in Harvard University and Boston University years ago when they took a collection of young men, some from sort of disadvantaged backgrounds, others from sort of the Harvard situation, and they followed them for, I think, 70 years. It's still ongoing now. And every year through the generations, they put them on the health monitors and everything like that. And when asked at 20, that's the ones that come up with success look like, a certain amount of fame and a certain amount of money. When they asked them at 50 or 60, it was about the connections, the relationships they've made in their life. So I'm saying to people, don't put that on the back burner. Look after your relationships with your family. Look after your relationship with your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your loved one or your pets or whatever like that, because they are, at the end of the day, what equates to success. Success for me, I tell you now, is giving back. When I talk to older people approaching retirement, I said, look to giving back something to family, community, society, country, because that is where you'll get the feeling of self-worth. You can have 10 million in the bank and you can be desperately unhappy. I mean, I see it all the time, as you do too. But it's all about things like empathy, gratitude, kindness. You talk about mindset. It's about changing your mindset and walking into your remaining days with, hey, I'm there for other people, not just for yourself, because, nobody wants to be in this world with no friends, with no relationships, or with nothing to show for it bar a Ferrari in the driveway,
Yeah. So, Brent, tell me, what does a day in your life look like, and how is your mind?
Well, yeah, the power of the mind is very important to me. I said I'm always really interested because I didn't have the power of my mind. I come from a situation whereby it was very hard for me to change my mindset. All my life it's been hard for me. I was just, whether or not it's hereditary, because my father was a very anxious man. and also was, when I'm sure, suffered from depression and different bouts of his life. So I inherited that sort of worrying DNA, if you call it like that way, even from a young age. And those panic attacks, it was always catastrophe. It was always, this is God's plan. Something's going to go wrong here. You're a loser. You're a failure. You're different. All these things I kept telling myself, until I got to a stage where I said, the one thing that I tell to people, how you build resilience, and we talk about resilience a bit later, but I always ask the same question to people. Even when I was counseling people through things, I would always say, ask whether your thoughts or your thoughts, your emotions, or your actions are actually harming or helping you. And I think that's the crux. If everybody asks themselves that question when they come into a situation, a stressful situation or something like that, ask, is your current mindset actually helping you or harming you? Because whether it's something to do with your health, whether it's something to do with a job or a stressful situation, you've got to get out of that negative mindset that is very hard to break. Because, as you know, negative feelings and emotions stick like that, and they're a default process. Whereas it's harder to tell ourselves that things might work out or things might not be as bad as we thought they are. That's the harder thing to do, because your mind wants to keep you, as you well know, Ciara, your mind wants to keep you in that place of protection, rather than stepping out of your comfort zone and saying, okay, I'm going to give this new job a try. I'm going to give this new relationship a try. And it may not fail. And that took me years to develop that kind of mindset. Now, I don't get it right all the time, but rugby played a huge part in that. And it played a huge part in my coaching career after that, because as a rugby player, and I know why, that's just the way it was in New Zealand rugby, to a certain degree, I felt I was bullied as a player. Don't go kicking the ball, Pope, or something, because forwards don't kick the ball, when I was a good kicker of the ball. So when I realised what success meant on the sporting field, it was really as much about changing the players' mindsets as it was about their physical abilities. If I could go to a player and say, hey, you're a great little player, you're fantastic, this is what you do well, if we can just work on the things that you need to work on, I got far better response from those people as it went on. And people would always come to me and say, my God, Brent, this player is completely different to what he was last year. Our club want him back now. And I said, it's all about not focusing on what they can't do. It's focusing on what they can do. Yes. And that's the same as I say to employers out there or CEOs out there. If you're prepared to be a bit more vulnerable with your own faults, you welcome back people coming saying, hey, he's not the perfect CEO after all. He's going through these things too. And it allows you to say to people, hey, life isn't perfect for all of us. Nobody's the perfect parent. Nobody's the perfect CEO. Nobody's the perfect coach. But if we can just change the mindset of our employees or our team or our friends or whatever to be more positive than negative. And that has been a very hard thing for me and other people that suffer from mental health illness to do, because what the brain wants to keep you is in that negative pattern, because that's where it feels that it's looking after you. So you've got to branch out from that. And I have a lot of things I have to do when I get into a period of kind of, when I know that I'm starting to slide, I just have to go to work. As much as I would have to gone to work in the gym, I have to go to work on my mental health and changing the in to change the out, if that's the use of an old cliche. But that's very important. It's very important to put the work into. See, people don't care.
No.
I go to people all the time when I'm talking. The first question I ask them is, have you done anything specifically for your physical health over the last month? Walk in the park, walk the dog, go to the gym. Everybody will put up their hands. Everybody will put up their hand. And I'll say, keep your hand up if you've done anything specifically for your mental health in the same time period. Hardly anybody. Because we're not taught how to change that mindset. We just think it's going to come naturally. That if we're fit physically and we hydrate and we have a good diet and everything like that, bang, we should be mentally okay. Well, I'm here to tell you that doesn't always happen. Didn't happen to me. I was one of the fittest rugby players in New Zealand at one stage, physically fit. And I was always told to do the same thing. Anytime I went to see somebody about my mental health, it was always related back to the physical health. Brent, go for a walk in the park, get some sunshine, meet a couple of friends for pints or whatever. That work for you. So don't be a fixer all the time. Be a listener to people.
I want to go back to what you were saying there, because I think the whole notion of failure and the fear of failure and getting outside your comfort zone. Do you think are people afraid of being vulnerable? I mean, I know
Absolutely.
everyone's afraid of failure, but if we got vulnerable and we were comfortable in that.
It's the secret. It's the secret in one. I despair sometimes when I hear people talk and stuff, and if you haven't been there, how would you know? For people that will say, oh, this is what you should and shouldn't do. And that's why I said be a listener rather than a fixer. Because, when you tell somebody to go back that's suffering from depression, oh, just go back to the gym or eat better, or somebody that's got anorexia or whatever, say, just go down and have a burger or something. Mm-hmm. That's your judgment on them. Because I'm telling you now, when you're depressed, the last thing you can think about is going to the bloody gym. That's the last thing you can think about. You're just trying to stay alive at that stage. Yeah. And that's where I despair. And I think you're right. I think it's this having an ability to change your mindset when you have to, and for it not to be a scary thing, because there's more pain and more stress and anxiety in staying where you are than putting one foot forward and moving forward. So, resilience is not about bouncing back. It's about bouncing forward for me. Mm-hmm. It's not good enough just to say, oh, I'm resilient because I bounced back from a trauma or a job loss or something. No, you need to bounce forward, and you need to say, I'm going to be a better person than I was in this situation a month ago. Not just the equal, but better. And that's the way I always looked at it. I said, if I'm going to come back, I'm going to come back stronger and better than I was before. Now, do I always get it right? Absolutely not. And I've got to go through the added, I suppose, loneliness of having a mental health illness that I've got to deal with. But I look at especially men out there and I say, actually, because of my vulnerability, I am in a stronger position to be able to deal with things coming down the track than you are. You may sit there and look down at your shoes and think this doesn't apply to me now. And I'm saying, be warned, because everybody in the room that I'm talking to, between 30 to 50 or 60% of them at some stage in their life will have not only suffer from some sort of mental health trauma, but will have a diagnosable mental health disorder. So if it hasn't happened to you yet, be ready. I hope that it doesn't for people. But what I want to say to them is have your toolbox ready to go. I know what's in my toolbox. Mm-hmm. Do they? Do they know if they go home this afternoon in anybody's life and experience, a family member taking their own life, or experience a terminal illness diagnosis, or experience the loss of a pet, or a divorce breakup, or the loss of their assets, do they know that suddenly they can be in it? And especially for men, they can be in it like that and can think there's no way out. And that's when I want people to see men in particular, only reach out for help at crisis stage. At crisis stage. And then for a lot of men, it's too late. So I'm all about early intervention, getting younger people to talk with their parents about things, to talk to their school, to talk to their teachers at school, to talk to someone. If they're going through bullying, if they're going through problems at home, if they're going through problems with their sexuality, with their weight, with their gender, whatever it is, a problem shared in my world is still a problem halved. Yeah. So if you can just share that vulnerability and say, hey, because by being vulnerable yourself, Ciara, as you know, just watch the floodgates open to people coming back, to you with support and love and care. And I just did a thing last week in a pharmaceutical company where a guy, just talking about my elephants down there, and a guy got up in tears and he spoke about the effect of his father's passing had on him a few years ago. And he was really nervous, and he said afterwards, I don't know whether you prompted me to get up and tell my story, but he just said, I can't believe the support and care that I've got from my colleagues and people coming up and saying, hey, mate, I went through the same thing as you did, and I know where you are, and I'm there for you. Like, it's just a lovely thing. And if people are just more, people come to me all the time and say, how do we create a safe environment in the workplace, especially, or at home? It starts with being more vulnerable.
Yeah.
It starts with a conversation. Everything has to start somewhere. The recovery process has to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's like asking, if not, it's like asking an alcoholic to go to a 12-step program when he's not ready to give up drink. So what I'm saying to people is, look, even my elephant project, it's not the answer. I know that it's not the answer, but maybe, just maybe, for people, it's a start.
Yeah.
It's the start of the journey where they can get greater awareness about what's going on, greater understanding about what's going on, and say, okay, about that, like the Samaritans, it'll be okay, friend.
Yeah.
It will be, if you can just reach up and reach out and change your mindset about, giving yourself some more positivity and more self-belief, and that you can recover from this. Don't drown in negativity. Don't drown in sort of negative affirmations about who you are as a person or whatever like that. We're all just trying to make our way through life. And for some people, it's a little bit harder. That's all.
Exactly. Yeah, that's it. It's just a little bit harder. That's really good advice, Brent. I want to know, what's in your toolbox? What do you turn to in those moments where you need to say, okay, I need to change what's going on up here?
Yep. The greatest thing I've done, Ciara, I think for me, the greatest thing I've done is, that's why I was fascinated to come on this, because it is about changing the mindset, and mindset matters. The greatest thing that helped me especially over recent times, was my reframing of things like stress.
Yeah.
My reframing of looking at it and saying, okay, the worst thing is going to happen, because that's what very much my life centered on. Look, don't try this because it's going to fail. Don't do this because getting into a new relationship, she's going to leave you. Don't do this because you're not going to have a job in a year. So I've tried to reframe that over recently. I've tried to view acute stress as being something that is actually positive. I say to people, make stress your friend. Look at something that's happening, whether it's preparing for an after dinner talk, whether it's doing your best man speech at your brother's wedding, whether it's doing something like that. Look at it as your body's and mind's way preparing you for the challenge as the best it can, and run with that. Don't run with the fear of it. Run with the fact is, okay, I can do this. I may not get that job, but if I don't try it and I don't go for it, there's every chance I won't get it. And it takes me back to something. There used to be a guy, I'm going back, this is a relatively funny story in a way, but there used to be a guy that used to come on radio in New Zealand when I was young. His name was Earl Nightingale, and he was a kind of ahead of his time. He was like the sort of the modern day Robbins. He come on the radio with his psychology for about half an hour. And I remember one day being terrified to ask this beautiful young girl out to the school dance, because I thought that, she wouldn't consider me, because I was punching above my weight, even thinking that I would ask this beautiful young girl out. And anyway, I listened to Earl Nightingale, and the same guy come on with a similar problem, saying, oh, well, I can't ask this woman to a prom. And he said something that resonated with the rest of life. He said, but your fear is her saying no. And he said, yeah. And he said, well, if you don't make the call, you're getting the same answer, which means that he wasn't going to the ball with this young lady anyway, because he was too scared to ask. So prompted with that new energy, I got on the phone and I rang this young girl, and you would hope that the story ends well, but she just said, what with you? No, and hung up. So but it was a lesson learned that if you don't give something a try, you're never going to know. No. Chronic stress is a bit different. And all I'm saying to people around chronic stress is prioritize what is stressing you. Don't try to multitask your way through 10 stresses a day. Don't get out of bed at the start of the day and say, oh, well, the kids have got to go to school. I've got the presentation at work. I'm not getting on well with my partner. Stress everywhere. Write down your stresses and what is stressing you the most, and deal with that. Give the energy time to that, and say, I can deal with this today. I can deal with the presentation. I can deal with the deadline. I'll get that out of the way. Then I'm going to deal with the conversation I need to have with my kids or something, or the teachers. So people try to multitask stress, as you know.
Yeah.
Try to take it all on. I'm doing this. That's where often women come into. They try to deal with all their stress at once. When I'm saying to them, when I used to talk to them, I say, look, relax, just deal with these one at a time. And what's the most important? Then I practice mindfulness, trying to live in the now and in the present, because again, the past has already happened. You've no control over that. You've some control over the future, but not really. But what you control is the now. Then the other one's important to me is, if you're feeling a bit down or a bit negative or something, just celebrate your little achievements every day. Because when you all add them up, you can look back. When I've been in my darkest times, I've looked back and I said, yeah, but you still managed to do all that, Brent. Whether it was meeting a friend for a coffee, whether it was, I remember writing down one time I had a mint chocolate chip ice cream, and that made me happy, that little thing.
Yeah.
And I'd add them up and I'd say, hey, you were down today and you felt low, but you still managed to do this. And then I try to do something that I enjoy every day, whether it's going to the movie by yourself, whether it's reading a book, whether it's taking a bit of a walk by yourself. Give yourself a bit of space to do something that you enjoy. And so many people write that down. Must enjoy myself. Must enjoy. But do it, because that's what balance in life is about. Now, it's not to say it's easy, and but I'm not ashamed anymore to say that I've had to go and have therapy, and I've had to be on medication sometimes. I've had to talk to psychologists and psychotherapy, because that's the help I need.
Yeah.
But it was far easier for me to accept that. It was just as easy to go to a doctor and talk about what was going on here as it was to go to them with a sports injury, because I took the judgment out of it. I thought,
That's it.
the
reframing of it.
Exactly, the reframing of what people think about. Don't care if you're going through down days. We all do. What you've got to care about is getting back to a place where you're happy in your life, and don't take anybody else's advice or judgment on that. Find your own path. What is yours? Mine is space, because it's stress, practice mindfulness, achievements, make connections we talked about, and enjoy the year's enjoyment, be more empathetic in my life, giving back, find your purpose. All these things, they take time. It's not just something that you can wake up one day like that and by lunchtime you say, oh, well, I'm positive now I'm a go-getter and I just had a bit of a blip. No, it's just don't let anxiety, depression, negative thinking creep up on you. Sort it out when it comes across. At the start, do something about it, because you do the same for the gym. If somebody told you you've got a wedding coming up or something like that and you needed to lose a few pounds, do we know the same thing about our mental health? No, we don't. We ignore it.
I think you made a really good point there, really powerful, about the chalk ice. And that was a little piece of joy.
That was it, the single piece of joy that day.
Yeah, like when you look at social media and you reference social media and what young people have to put up with, they're seeing all of these posts of people that look like they're leading these magnificent lives and they're happy all the time. And it's just not true, because it's not possible to be happy all the time.
It's not possible.
No.
It's not possible. And I was just talking to someone yesterday about it, Ciara, and I said, Andy Warhol said it years ago. He said, there'll come a time where everybody wants their 15 minutes of fame. And it's hugely discouraging. Everything pops up, even though you don't want to go it. Everything pops up on YouTube and stuff every day. And my problem is, I was just talking to a woman yesterday and about it, and I said, if young people don't want to feel objectified, if they don't want to be put into a corral, well, why are they posting up kind of things of that have no relevance, sort of on a skateboard or something like that, or having a meal out there, or getting at the gym and looking good and all this. It's overrun with how you should look. that you have to be a certain size as a woman, you have to be a certain size now as a guy, buffed and in the gym. And so people need to look at their lives and say, hey, I'm an interesting person. I may be a bit different. I may go to rugby school, but I like playing in the band. Good for you. Find your own way. And you're right, because everybody's trying to find someone else's way.
That's it.
And YouTube allows that. TikTok allows that. They allow you a lens into somebody else's life, like Andy Warhol said. And for 9 times out of 10, you're right, that life is false. These Ferraris, these holidays, these the best burger you've ever had, the best holiday I've ever had, the best girlfriend I've ever had, the best boyfriend I've ever had. That's why I talk about people wanting validation or expectation. What is their expectation on what will make them happy? That's the question. Not somebody else's happiness or perceived happiness. No. What will make you happy?
Yeah, exactly.
Who are you as a person? It's a lifelong question that people actually infrequently ask themselves, what will really make me happy here?
Yeah.
Because 9 times out of 10, it's somebody else's list. It's not your list. It's somebody else's list. Have the 4-bedroom place in Dublin 4 will make me happy. Well, I tell you now, most of these things don't actually make people happiness, because happiness, as I said, comes from an intrinsic journey through your life to happiness. That's where happiness comes from. It's the same when you talk about sport. Happiness isn't actually in the trophy. It's in the journey to get to that place.
That's what I always tell my clients. Yeah. It's not the destination. It's
not the destination. Because when you reach the destination, what happens?
Exactly.
You need another destination.
What's your next thing? Yeah.
So suddenly, people will always come to me when I was counselling. They'd say, yes, Brent, I married my childhood sweetheart, but what now? I said, what do you mean, what now? What now? Where do I find happiness now? They've had their kids, or empty nesters. Where do I find happiness now? And again, it's the journey rather than saying I've reached that spot, because you'll never actually reach that spot.
No. And do you think it's about getting to know yourself as opposed
Absolutely.
to box ticking society's expectations?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. That just goes back to what we just talked about, isn't it? It's knowing. It's the same as mental health. I didn't like the fact that I was negative, and I had to do something about it. I could have, and I still do. I'm probably still more negative than other people I know, but I had to come to the realization that's how I was, and I had to try to turn it around and say, actually, I was ashamed of my mental health for so many years, Ciara. I was ashamed of it, because I felt that people were out there judging me and saying, how can this big, strong rugby player be a wimp? How can he, what's he talking about? I knew people would be talking behind my back, and I knew that. But I look at it now and I say, hey, maybe it's the best thing I ever did. Maybe it's the best thing I ever did. When somebody comes up and shakes my hand when I'm out walking, saying, Brent, in tears, you saved my life, I go back to the fact that the Samaritans saved my life, and I just said, that means more to me than anything. I don't care whether somebody comes up and says to me, Brent, you scored the winning try, you're a great player. What I want people to come up and say, I helped change the direction of their life in a good way. And so everybody can do that. That smile at the supermarket, that conversation you have with someone on the bus, that alleviating loneliness in somebody's life, that whatever it is, those connections you make, they can save anybody's life at any one time. You don't know what somebody's going through in their life. You don't know. And just that smile and say, hey, you're looking great, or how are you, or something like that, and really checking in, not checking on, checking in with someone. And there's a difference. But somebody asked me this last week, what's the difference between checking in and checking on? Checking in is really asking those questions about how you are. I've noticed you've been struggling, Ciara. You've been a bit down. We want the old Ciara back. Can I help? Is there anything? That's checking in. Checking on is just saying, oh, well, hey, Ciara, you look well, moving on. That's checking on. Checking in is important. and everybody should be checking in with everybody as much as they can. Check in with your kids, check in with your partner. So many people have the problem around the word love, more, as somebody said on the T-shirt, more love yous than F yous, and I thought
Yeah.
that was a bit, I suppose, a bit crudely put, but it really resonated with me because more people are happy to use the negative words rather than saying, if you go back and tell your son or your daughter or your partner, hey, I really love you and I really appreciate you.
Yeah.
What's the harm in that? Oh, I'm not going to do that. Oh, they
Those
would
words
know.
can be so powerful.
They would know. Well, if you don't tell them, how would they know? And a bit of advice here. I wrote a lovely letter. I say lovely, but was lovely, a heartfelt letter to my dad, just telling him how I felt about him and how he had shaped me as a person and how I very much do what I do because he was a kind man and a loving man and a non-judgment man. So that's where that side of my empathy comes from. And I wanted to give it to him one summer, and then I decided, no, I'll give it to him next year. Well, next year he was gone,
No.
you know.
Yeah.
And I just said to myself, so the next day I went and wrote a letter to my brother, the same, and I gave it to him because it was just, I thought, no, I'm not going to let that happen again. I need to tell people when I care for them or how much they've meant to me in my life. And that's important to me, that people know that.
Yeah.
And it's not a sissy thing to do. It's not a overly vulnerable thing to do. I mean, people just need to get used to doing it. Going home and saying, hey, son, or to their daughter, hey, like, please feel free to come to your mum and I or something. If something's going on, you may not all the time and you may, but, find a friend or something, but know that we're here to support you and that we love you and we care for you.
That's it.
And, I remember talking to someone a few years ago and she said the most loving thing her mother had said to her was, around mental health, she had a mental health illness, was, I don't get it, but I get you. And I thought that was lovely. I don't get it. You don't have to understand what somebody's going through. You don't. We never will.
No, exactly.
You'll never know why that person that you saw down at the shops last week you had a chat to is no longer with us. You'll never understand what they were going through, and you can't understand. Well, that's why I go back to say, don't be a fixer. Be a listener and be a carer, rather than somebody that says, oh well, that person shouldn't have taken their life like that. They do, and we're never going to understand because it's easier for people to talk about things that people can see rather than the unseen. And that's the terrifying thing about mental health. So what do I do? I do for because I try to open up that conversation with people before it's too late. I don't want to lose another friend. I don't want to lose another, somebody, a colleague or whatever like that through suicide or taking their own life. And, I'm sick of people saying we can't talk about that, but we need to.
We need to. Yeah.
We need to open the conversation and see what people are going through and have the signposting in place to say, okay, if you're struggling with something, talk to someone.
That's it. It's the first step, isn't it? Getting that.
The first step for everything.
Yeah.
For everything is talking and being more vulnerable, as you said. And if you do those two things, you'll be okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because somebody always cares and somebody always wants to help. You've just got to find that person.
Yeah.
Whether it's a small problem that's overcome in an hour, whether that's a more major problem, it all starts with a conversation.
Yeah.
If you're going if you're in a bad relationship and that, talk about it. If you're in a job situation where you're being bullied, or you're going to school and you're being bullied, or you're being harassed, or you feel different, or you feel overweight, or you feel a different color or different sex or whatever like that, talk to someone, please.
Yeah.
And I just want to ask you finally, Brent, around the mindset thing. I work on the basis that I believe you can shift your mindset. I don't believe it's as easy for everybody. I think some people
might find it easier. Some people find it more difficult. But I think when you give somebody the agency, or that they know that it's within their control to do
Absolutely.
this.
100%. 100%. And what you do is marvelous for people, because if I'd have known that when I was going through, if I'd had somebody like you come to me and say, hey, you can change the in to change the out, I would have loved to have heard that. I had to find my own way through that. And it took me, it's what's taken me 50 years or 40 years to find that place where I said, okay, look, and again, I go back to the fact you've just got to go to work on your inner self. You've got to say, okay, this needs to be addressed. How do I address it? Get some help along the way by people that encourage you to say, look, I've got to look at this differently. Doesn't matter how many years you've been looking at something negatively, you've got to change the mindset and say, okay, this is going to be okay. I can get through this. It's going to take a bit of help, and it's also going to take a bit of time, because as you know, it's a process, Ciara.
Yeah.
It's a process. You've got to go through the process, because we all know that negative feelings and emotions stick with us.
Yes.
It's harder to overload your system with positive. And it's like somebody, I was watching a YouTube thing the other day. It's like teaching yourself, if you've been right-handed, it's like teaching yourself suddenly to be left-handed, when every reach you make goes for the right-hand spoon or whatever. So that's how long it can maybe take for somebody. It's not something that you just go and see somebody like yourself, or you talk to somebody, a therapist, on Tuesday afternoon between 5 or 6, and then you say, hey, that's sorted.
No.
Because it's the iceberg under the water that we worry about. It's the okay, you got through this and you think that that's easily. What about the next problem? Because again, be warned, because it stacks up.
Yeah.
All these little problems that seem minuscule to anybody at one stage, added onto the top of another little problem, added onto the top of another problem, suddenly then you've got a mountain to climb.
That's it. And Brent, if you were to give some words of hope to people who are listening to this, what would you say to them?
If you're prepared to embrace the change that you need to go, then not only can you say you can bounce forward. That would be my advice. If you're prepared to put the work in, to recognize that you have some issues that you have to take care of, get professional help or get help, then move on, and you can achieve anything in life. But you've got to do the work. It's not a magic bullet or not a magic pill for anybody. Everybody has their own way around it. But please have your toolbox. Please do something to say what your toolbox looks like. If number one on your list in your toolbox is, I know I can ring Ciara, I know I can ring John, or I know I can ring, they'll understand, put them down. Put them on your speed dial. If part of your kind of your toolbox is to spend more time with family and more friends, make more time to do that. These things take a bit of work, but people don't work at them.
No.
And it's the same. Just finish with this. It's the same as when I talk to businesses or multinationals, organization out there. Here's the kicker for me, Ciara. If we know, and it's not just coming from me, but we know statistically all around the world, the three biggest costs in business today, or have been for the last industrial revolution or whatever, is been job retention, training people up, and then leaving the job, days off work, absentee workforce, and also lack of productivity in the workplace when people are in there, The biggest reasons for those, statistically 1 and 2 for those costs, are depression, anxiety. Yet the lowest spend from businesses is on mental health awareness or mental health well-being. It doesn't make sense, does it?
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't make sense. Invest in your people. Invest in yourself. That would be my advice. Invest in yourself. And that needs to be investing in your mind as well as investing in your body.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Yeah, don't leave one behind.
No.
Because it's no good being like me. It's no good being fit and physically strong and looking fit and looking well and all those things, when what the major problem is what's going on
in here
inside.
Yeah.
So that was the learnings for me. And also the learnings for me is that I have to keep at it. There'll be days where I feel better or positive, and there'll be days where I don't feel so positive, or I can feel negative as hell. But that's not that's life.
Exactly. Yeah, for everybody.
That's
and that's where
life.
the toolbox comes in.
That's what the toolbox is. And have your own toolbox and be proud of it. Say, I'm
Yeah.
ready for this.
Yeah.
I'm ready for the stress. I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to embrace the change.
I'm
I'm going
going
to
to
look at
learn
my
from
life and
it.
say, these things need to change.
Hmm.
And this is how I'm going to go about it. I'm going to see
Yeah.
somebody, be it a life coach, be it somebody like yourself, be it someone like that. I'm going to see somebody and I'm going to get my life back on track. I'm sick of wallowing. I'm sick of not making that first step forward, because the pain comes from staying in the same place. The pain doesn't come from moving a step closer to what you want. It comes from staying in your, step out of your comfort zone,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it just makes the next step easier.
Yeah. I think
You
that
know?
sums it all up, Brent. Yeah. I think that's exactly it. You have to push yourself into the uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Push yourself into the uncomfortable in everything you do. In
Yeah.
everything you do. Relationships, jobs, family. Push yourself into that place, because it just makes the next step a little bit easier.
Yeah.
And sometimes if somebody is going through something, that they think is worrying you, ask yourself, look, and sometimes I go back in the reverse. I sort of say, what's the worst outcome here? What's the
Yeah.
worst outcome? And is this, again, then I'll go, the second question will be, is my present thought pattern helping or harming this? Is my worries about a new job actually helping me? No, it's usually going to be the answer. No, I'm getting worried. I'm getting stressed.
Yeah.
I can't concentrate. I'm sweating. How can that be helping anything? And then the
Exactly.
last question I ask is, what needs to happen to make that happen?
Yeah.
What needs to happen to make that happen? I just talked to how that applies in any aspect of life. I was talking to a guy who rang me there about a month ago, just that he wanted to change his career later life, and he'd always loved to be a rugby coach. And he said, Brand, he said, I can't do it. He's negative. I'd love to do it, but I can't. I said, ask yourself this question: what needs to happen to make that happen if you want it? Well, I suppose I have to find a club that's looking for a coach. Okay. Next question. What needs to happen to make that happen? Well, I suppose we've got to get a couple of numbers. What needs to happen to make? If you go back all the steps, you'll find the solution.
Exactly. And you'll have
And it
your
started
action
with
plan.
it. Now, luckily enough, he's got a job.
Yeah.
He's got a job in the States coaching, and he's loving it. And
Amazing.
it just started with a phone call. He went back through that process and said, okay, I need to find a number of somebody that might know someone in a club that might want somebody. And that started the process of a life change for that. So you can ask that question at any time. What needs to happen to make that happen? I need to go and see Ciara. What needs to happen to make that happen? I need to get my toolbox. What needs to happen to make that happen? And sooner then you'll get to where you want to go.
That's all for this week. If you've been affected by anything in this episode, you can contact the Samaritans on 116 123. Next week, I'm joined by GP and founder of Women in Medicine in Ireland, Dr. Sarah Fitzgibbon, who openly shares her cancer diagnosis journey and how mindset work has helped her.